You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. I have Scott Nelson. He's the founder and chair of the Human Data Commons Foundation. There, we get that. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and just going back a little bit, you asked me sort of about my background. I'm an relatively early sort of web entrepreneur. I started probably the first web development company in Canada, in Vancouver in like 1993. It's very early times. Being a computer geek up to that point. And so really jumped in, in the early days on bringing the web into the public sphere. And my primary focus then was working around sustainability issues. So really working with the sustainability community, both business and on policy and the activism side to get that sort of out in front. And that was pretty soon after the Betterment report that sort of really brought sustainability into the fore. And then I sold out of that company at the end of '99, just before the .com bubble burst, although I wasn't really sort of part of that thing, and became very interested in open source, and that's why my bio sort of says that I've been a strong advocate of open source and open standards since the turn of the millennium, and again sort of brought open source, really pushed open source and open solutions into the sustainability and ecology sort of spheres online. And then my next big sort of transition was getting involved in Bitcoin in 2010 and blockchain and issues around sort of the authenticity and verifiability of in that case, starting transactions, but of course it's broadened out a fair bit since then. And then what brought me to the Human Data Commons Foundation was a couple of years ago, I was working with a group, we were working on a startup around sort of really transformative tech. We were looking at ways that we could pull data sources in from quantified self devices, Fitbits and Garmins, and things like the Muse, anything to do with sort of meditation and health and collecting that kind of data, looking at possibly ways combining that with more traditional health system data as well. And we just noticed that, in order to be sort of trusted in this space with all of that kind of data, that we would need to have a structure that was not, at least partly not focused just on maximizing return. And thus we spun off a foundation, which has become the Human Data Commons Foundation. And the startup that we were working on actually ended up, because of health issues with my co-founder, ended up sort of being shelved, but I kept the Human Data Commons Foundation going. And it focuses on how can we make sort of the best decisions around all of this powerful data that's out there? How can we determine which are the sort of best sources of the data? And what can we do to put structures in place that will encourage people to share their data for the purposes of advancing, human consciousness and conscious evolution, but in a way that also sort of protects their privacy and places them at the center of that agency around how that data gets used. So that's sort of the overarching narrative behind the Human Data Commons Foundation.
Okay, well, specifically, you're looking to just use blockchain to give people control of their data, or what's like your primary focus right now, and what types of data are you looking at?
Yeah, so I mean, our primary focus is, at least in terms of the activities that we have been involved in since inception, which was 2.5 years ago. Two main things that we've done on a yearly cycle. One is we put together an event in Vancouver, which is where we're based, Vancouver, Canada, where it's kind of like a miniature transformative tech conference. I'm also a founding partner in a venture capital company called Human Data Capital that looks at ways that we can employ capital into basically these sort of same goals and approaching these same problems. And so having made a number of investments in that sphere, I wanted to bring those people together into the same room, take them through a transformative experiential process, and see what came out the other end, with no sort of expectations that anything particular would come out the other end. Just see what happens when you get all these amazing people in the same room and getting them, placed in help generate some trust between them and help them think of themselves as co-collaborators rather than purely competitors. And so that's an annual event called Participatory Technology that we hold, and we've held the second two of those so far. And then the other activity that we have taken on for ourselves is to try and understand and to help inform people about how their data within the quantified self sphere is being used. And so with that, we publish an annual, what we call a report card, where we go through sort of the top companies in the wearables and quantified self sector, if you will. So Garmin and Fitbit and these various things, a bunch that also appear at the Transformative Tech Conference because we're interested in that. And then we review them on their privacy policies, their terms of service, how the data gets used, and how much agency they give to the users over the use of that data. And that's published as a report that you can get off of our website. So we just published the second annual one of those in November. So it's very current. People want to check out humandatacommons.org. They'll see it right on the homepage there, and they can download that for free. They don't have to give up any information. It does a nice ranking and a very good sort of description of our methodology, how we came to the conclusions that we're at, that we present in there. And
well, can we go into a little bit of detail? What kinds of data do you see right now being used or misused? Which ones are going to be critical for people to be concerned about now?
Yeah, well, I'm a huge fan of the work of Yuval Noah Harari. I don't know how familiar you are with his work. He's written several books, Sapiens and Homo Deus. Yeah, and Homo Deus in particular, I think he really delved into what's central and what's going on here. And it's basically, one of the ideas is this kind of this is him saying this, but I totally agree with it. There's kind of two main streams around this, and it's how we define ourselves as individuals and how others see us to some extent. And largely, we're moving to a place where we're viewed in terms of the data that we're producing. And certainly, I think you see this in services like anything from Google or Facebook. It is our data that defines us and makes us important. And from the perspective of these players, it's how they can sell more to us and target, sort of our desires, our needs. But, I think you only have to look at things like the Cambridge Analytica scandal to see that, when you've got this much data on people and their behavior and what their likes and desires and values and stuff are, then, the amount of sort of manipulation that you can do of them as individuals is, pretty scary and impressive. And, I think I think there's a lot, we're living in a time right now, I think, where there's a lot of issues around this that are starting to be understood by people. And when I say understood by people, I mean sort of the general population is becoming sort of much more aware of this. So on the one hand, you have things like the Transformative Tech Conference where, I really do believe that the people there in that room are like, we want to do this for the best possible purposes. This is about the transformation and evolution of human consciousness, and that's what we're doing here. That's the data. That's the reason we're collecting this data. That's the goal of this data is to advance that as quickly as possible. And I subscribe to the work of American philosopher Ken Wilber and integral theory, and I don't know how familiar you are with that, but that has a very sort of transformative and evolution of consciousness model sort of wrapped around it. And I think it sort of offers one of the best possible models that we know of currently for approaching sort of complex problems like this, multivariate, multi-party, lots to try and figure out here in determining what the best decision is to move forward with. And then the other sort of real elephant in the room here, of course, which is related very directly to this, is artificial general intelligence and the tremendous advances being made in AI, because all of these machine learning algorithms that we're seeing being developed so successfully now, right? Like the advances made in certainly in the last 5 years are just incredible, and they're based upon data in large part, right? And so these companies realize that the more data they have, the better the machine learning algorithms that they can produce out of that. That seems to be the case up until now. And that brings with it sort of enormous power and possibly enormous peril too. We're already seeing lots of algorithms being put in place to make decisions, and some of them are very innocuous, like Spotify. What's the next song it's going to serve up for me? Well, it looks at what I like and what I don't like, and goes, oh, I bet you he's going to like this one. Tries that one, and it's usually pretty accurate. But there's also a lot of systemic injustice that can be perpetuated through the use of just putting algorithms in place that are based upon data that may not take other factors into account, that may end up perpetuating injustice and unfairness in ways that we really would rather not have happened. So, it's a very interesting time to be looking at this. There's lots of issues, and how the data gets used, who has control of it. These are big issues. And so, we really want to, our intention here at the Human Data Commons Foundation is to sort of really bring more attention to that and be part of that conversation. And again, I think that integral theory offers a way to approach this that's probably more holistic than anything else out there if you really dig in and incorporate the methodology in the fullness that it allows. And it's not to say that it's
what's an example of a solution? I mean, I know that the premise makes sense. But what's an example of a specific solution that's been proposed?
Well, I mean, even to talk about solutions is to you're already stepping onto thin ice to talk about offering solutions or being able to make a solution. And I mean, within our organization, we prefer to talk about processes rather than solutions. I mean, one of the issues here is that if you've got an entity, any sort of entity, a corporate entity like Google or Facebook, or a government entity, government department, or pick the Pentagon or something like that, they've got a certain culture going on there, and that culture is going to have them sort of moving in a certain direction, and things happen that match the culture or don't match the culture, and things that don't match the culture are going to be, they're not going to be given much sort of due process or consideration in terms of a direction that they should be going in. And, it's very easy to, it's very hard to to transcend a culture. And so when the culture is about, selling ads, for example, and let's just, give that broadly as a culture for one of these internet giants. If that comes first, then a whole bunch of other things flow naturally from that, and decisions flow from that, and rewards within those, how those organizations operate, and who gets promoted and who doesn't, and so it all kind of goes in that direction. And to break through that and to bring sort of other models to that is a very difficult thing to do within those structures. And usually it's not until there's some sort of, overwhelming crisis, which, maybe Facebook is approaching that. I wouldn't be surprised, actually. I mean, there's enough going on there and enough unhappiness, it seems, and enough sort of awareness within the public about, the imbalance going on there and how that data is, being leaked and, not being protected, and privacy is not being respected, and, companies are, have managed to grab other third-party companies have managed to grab all sorts of data, and people's perception of the value of their data and the relationship that they want to have with the data that they produce is changing as well. I think a lot of people didn't think about it that much, and I think there's much more awareness about that now. So again, just getting back to your question, just to say what is the solution. It's not an easy question. It's very context dependent, but I think there are these processes which can help really bring sort of more awareness, more perspective. I mean, bringing more perspective and including more sort of parties in the decisions that happen, I think is sort of the first goal here. And in terms of sort of alternative structures, that's one of the things that I'm personally very interested in. If you look at something like there's a cooperative, a health data cooperative out of Switzerland called mydata.coop, MIIDATA.coop, and I think that what's going on there, if you have a look, is very interesting alternative structure for how to approach the kind of problem that is going on here. And what they've done is they've first of all adopted a corporate structure, which is a cooperative. So if you're aware of the sort of the difference between a credit union and a bank is a very corporate structured entity where the amount of shares that you own in the company determine sort of your level of decision making in that organization. A cooperative is a much more democratic structure where it doesn't matter how much sort of ownership you have in it, you have one vote that's equal to all the other members in that co-op. So it changes the dynamic in terms of decision making. And then the other thing that I think is very impressive, or what really appeals to me about something like mydata.coop is the ability for me to join as a member, for me to voluntarily include my health and quantified self, other sources of data in there, and then for me as a member to choose, okay, here comes a proposal from a health company about a study that they would like to do, and they're requesting data, and it's my choice whether I want to include my data for the purposes of the research that is happening there. And so that's my individual choice to do that. And moreover, any remuneration that flows back in for the use of that data, I get a share of that by virtue of being a member of that cooperative. So it's a very different structure than we're used to, and how whether it can compete, I think it can compete in a very positive way with some of the other initiatives that are going on, but this is all very fertile ground for contestation at the moment, for sure.
Well, what's the status of data that we've given to Facebook and Google and all those companies? Is it ours? Is it theirs? Is it both of ours? What's your read on?
Well, my read on it is, I mean, if you look at the original terms of service of all of those, it's all theirs, and they get to do whatever they want with it. And, by and large, people do not read the terms of service and don't understand that this is what's going on, or they didn't. And rather, they were just, blinded by the ostensible free nature of the service that they were getting. But that is being challenged. One of the ways it's being challenged at a sort of a legislative way is through legislation like the GDPR, the General Data Privacy Protection Regulations that came out of Germany. So those came into effect last year, and one of the things that they do is say, and it's a European directive, so how much it applies to American services is still being figured out. But if those companies or services want to be able to reach the European market, then they have to follow the GDPR. And then once they put in place the requirements of the GDPR, I mean, that's a fair bit of work, actually, because, for example, one of the things the GDPR does is it says anybody who wants their data deleted has that right, and you have to do it, and you don't even get to keep a copy of it as a backup. So for a lot of these organizations, again, I'm just going to use the big ones, Google and Facebook, they've got, that was never part of the way that they structured their technology sort of behind the scenes and in the back end. It was to keep that data forever. And so, but if they want to continue, and this is just one example that comes out of the GDPR, if they want to continue to provide that service to European citizens, they have to incorporate technology into their platform that allows people to delete their data, know it's deleted, be verifiable, and so on. And that's just one aspect of the GDPR that it requires, or that it puts in place. And so, this just came into force last year. It does have actually interesting implications for blockchain, because, of course, blockchain is meant to be irrevocable and permanent. By virtue of the cryptographic signing around that data. So there's an interesting sort of tension, which we're going to have to see how that resolves between organizations that are employing blockchain technology as a way to sort of secure the data and show the transactions that have happened around the data and auditing trail. Those are various good uses, in my opinion, of blockchain technology that can be applied to this kind of thing. But then, if it's in a blockchain and it's secured into a blockchain and the data itself is in the blockchain, which is actually a very poor design choice, because blockchain is not really made for that at all. But you can secure other things through a blockchain. Then it becomes, by nature of the blockchain, impossible to honor that part of the GDPR. So, once it's in a blockchain, it's there forever. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, perhaps blockchain would be great for to be combined with the database and to show if the data in that database was ever altered.
Exactly.
And that it's there, but database management itself, it doesn't seem to be fast enough or good enough. And there's all these projects surrounding blockchain that have kind of like gone quiet. I've seen a little bit of enterprise use, but they seem to all have gone by the wayside. So, do you think that blockchain is going to be a savior of people's data, or is it just in a phase where it's building up, or what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I got into blockchain purely because of the currency aspects, because, I felt that the natural evolution of currency, once we move sort of beyond the nation state center of currency, which is still the case now, obviously, right? It's all national currencies. I use Canadian dollars, you use American dollars. American dollar, of course, is the global reserve currency. It's accepted everywhere, but that's rapidly changing as geopolitics sort of, shift and evolve as well. So to my mind, the reason that I was so interested in getting into blockchain was not about the blockchain aspect. That was interesting, but it was the fact that it was a censorship-proof global currency. And, I'm less, having been in that space now for, well, I guess we're getting close to 2019, almost 9 years. 9 years, actually, I think the day after tomorrow I first got involved in Bitcoin. Having watched that evolution and seeing, of course, the sort of the waves in the value of it, right? And the run up in value and then a crash. I mean, what we saw between this time last year and now, well, I'm pretty calm about that because that's the fifth one that I've been in that saw a big run up and then a crash of like 80% of the value and then drift along. And we'll probably drift along roughly in this same space if the pattern holds for, it could be another year before probably another crazy run up, in my opinion, and having been through 5 of these. But, there was so much hype last year, and with hype and with people making, a lot of money in a short time, there's, a couple of things come out of that. First of all, a lot of fraud, a lot of scams and projects that, are just there to suck money out of people and there was a tremendous amount of that last year. Everyone could spit out a white paper and raise a couple of $1 million in just like a few weeks. Didn't take a lot. And so it's not surprising at all that a lot of those projects have not gone anywhere. But, there's still a lot of very interesting projects out there. And I'm still a true believer in, first of all, the currency aspect of it, the transnational currency. I think that's here to stay. And certain aspects of the blockchain. And there's a couple in particular that I've watched closely, which are, related to transformative tech, in particular singularity nets. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Ben Goertzel.
No, what are they working on?
Oh, okay, so they're working on something very interesting. They were at Transformative Tech. So they're based out of Hong Kong, and their thing is to create artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and the way that they're doing it is to create open source sort of modules, a platform called OpenCog. So it's different aspects of cognition is what they're working on, and then you can combine the different aspects of the cognition, plug in sort of your own data and your own algorithms into it to create an AI, and then you can add that AI to sort of a market of AIs that run on a blockchain. And so the goal is for there to be all of these AIs that are using this blockchain to sort of bid for projects with each other or bid for services that they can provide to each other on a blockchain. So very interesting thought about our direction, I think, a very promising one, in order to build sort of this meta structure of AIs that have a way of, auditing and bidding and providing services and data for each other. So that's one. The other one that I'm very interested in, I'm also, I should say, an early, I think the first investor in one out of Berlin, Germany, called Ocean Protocol, which is a data marketplace on a blockchain for AI. And so that came out of a project that they were hired to do by Toyota on Toyota's self-driving cars. And they, looked at the data that Toyota had collected, and they came to the realization that, wow, we need another 1 trillion miles of driving data in order to crack the nut of self-driving cars. And so it doesn't make sense for any one car manufacturer to have to generate that data. It also doesn't make sense, it makes even less sense for each of them to be doing it in a silo, right? Knowing that each of them has to generate 1 trillion miles of driving data in order to crack this nut. Instead, why not have some kind of data marketplace for this that would reward people or give them a share in the research or access to the research that came out the other side. So you could pool the data from Toyota and from GM and from Honda and from whomever, and everyone gets access to it. The more data that they're putting in, that they're collecting, then the more access and the more return that they get for it. So again, it's kind of this cooperative model for how that data can be used. And again, you want to have...
Makes sense.
It makes sense.
Well, we covered a lot of ground. So what, it sounds like people need to do a lot of their own investigating and, looking at different resources and ideas and thoughts. So what are some resources for listeners where they could find out more?
Yeah, well, certainly our site, I think, is, it's a good little start around this issue. So Human Data Commons.Org. I know that in the States, the Electronic Frontier Foundation has been doing a lot of work around this as well, around data rights and how your data gets used. And I think you're going to see a lot more tools coming online as well, which allow you to sort of get a better handle on where your data has gone and helping you sort of navigate the space that's coming here around the GDPR and your new rights under the GDPR. So the EFF is good. We're good. I would say Mozilla's been doing quite a bit of good work around this as well. Mozilla Foundation. Those are some great starts to look more into this. One of the sort of challenges that I put out at the Transformative Tech conference, because I was on a panel about sort of data ethics and how do we figure this out, and I presented my data co-op as a sort of case in point, I think, for or an interesting example that this community might want to think about, right? Like if we're all moving in the same direction, then again you can kind of look back at Ocean Protocol as a good solution to that. I think why not share our data and figure out how to do that in the best possible way? And that's really what we're about. The other technology that I'm a big fan of, just in terms around privacy and stuff, is actually again a German project called Nextcloud, and that's a self-hosted, sort of privacy-centric, HIPAA-compatible, GDPR-compatible intranet, basically, or you can think of it kind of like Google Docs plus, a video chat system, so Hangouts, but private, so that you control all of the data on it, all of the access to it, and that quite frankly is what helps make it HIPAA and GDPR compliant. Is that you're sort of controlling that, and so I think that's another great existing technology that's out there to help promote this, and that people should be looking at for the purposes of their projects.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. Well, Scott, I appreciate you coming. And there's a ton of thought that still needs to go into, how data is used and how people are going to use it. So I appreciate you speaking on it. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you. And it's an exciting time, and I think it's evolving very quickly, and just sort of bringing a bit more attention around that and processes and ideas for how to do that in the best possible way. And thank you for what you're doing and sort of bringing a critical eye to where this is going and what it looks like. That's really important. So thank you.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.